The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace gardens, as Charles stood by the tall windows of his private study. His weathered hands held a cup of tea that had grown cold while he lost himself in thought. At 75, the weight of the crown felt heavier than ever, but it wasn't the responsibilities of kingship that troubled him this particular morning. Kate walked gracefully along the garden path below, her auburn hair catching the golden light as she bent to examine the roses that had been planted in memory of Diana. She moved with a quiet dignity that reminded Charles of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, yet there was something uniquely her own about the way she carried herself, the way she paused to speak with each gardener, remembering their names and asking about their families, spoke to a genuine warmth that couldn't be taught or practiced. Charles had watched this scene play out many times over the past months, always from this same window, always with the same mixture of admiration and something else he couldn't quite name. Kate had become more than just his daughter-in-law. She had become the steady presence the family desperately needed. While others around him seemed caught up in their own dramas and ambitions, Kate remained focused on what truly mattered. The sound of heels clicking on marble floors announced Camilla's approach long before she entered the room. Charles didn't turn around, knowing exactly what expression would be on his wife's face. The morning meetings with palace staff had become increasingly tense, and Camilla's frustration with what she saw as Kate's growing influence had reached a boiling point. "She's out there again," Camilla said, her voice carrying an edge that Charles had grown tired of hearing. "Playing the perfect princess for the cameras that aren't even there." Charles finally turned, setting his teacup down with deliberate care. "She's visiting the memorial garden. There are no cameras, Camilla. There's no audience except the gardeners and perhaps a security guard or two." Camilla moved to stand beside him at the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "That's exactly my point, Charles. She doesn't need an audience to perform. It's become who she is, and that makes her dangerous to the rest of us who are merely human." The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. Charles had heard variations of this complaint from Camilla countless times, but today something about her tone struck him differently. Perhaps it was the word dangerous, or perhaps it was the way she had emphasized the rest of us, as if Kate were somehow separate from the family rather than its newest pillar of strength. "Dangerous?" Charles repeated, his voice quieter than usual. "Kate has done nothing but serve this family with grace and dedication. She's raised 3 beautiful children, supported William through every challenge, and somehow managed to make the monarchy feel relevant to a new generation." Camilla's laugh was sharp and bitter, and in doing so she's made the rest of us look inadequate by comparison. "Do you think I don't see how people look at me when she's in the room? Do you think I don't notice how conversations stop when I approach, then resume with animated enthusiasm when she appears?" Charles turned away from the window to face his wife fully. In the morning light, he could see the lines of worry and resentment that had deepened around her eyes over the past year. This wasn't just about Kate, he realized. This was about Camilla's own insecurities, her own fears about her place in a family and an institution that had never fully embraced her. "Camilla," he began gently, "you are my wife and the queen consort. Your position is secure, is it?" she asked. And for a moment her vulnerability showed through the armor of her anger. "Because from where I stand it feels like I'm disappearing a little more each day. Kate doesn't have to try to overshadow me, Charles. She just exists, and somehow that's enough to make me feel invisible." The honesty in her admission caught Charles off guard. He had been so focused on the practical aspects of running the monarchy, on managing public opinion and maintaining the delicate balance of family dynamics, that he had perhaps overlooked the very real emotional toll this was taking on his wife. Down in the garden, Kate had finished her walk and was now sitting on a bench, writing in what appeared to be a small notebook. Even from this distance, Charles could see the concentration on her face, the way she paused occasionally to look up at the sky as if seeking inspiration. She had mentioned once that she liked to write thank you notes by hand, that she believed personal touches mattered in an increasingly digital world. "She writes to everyone," Charles said softly, not realizing he had spoken aloud until Camilla's sharp intake of breath reminded him of her presence. "What?" "Kate. She writes personal notes to everyone who serves the family, everyone who helps with events, everyone who shows kindness to the children. She remembers birthdays and anniversaries. She asks about sick relatives and follows up when people are struggling." Charles's voice carried a note of wonder, as if he were cataloging miracles rather than simple acts of human decency. Camilla was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more fragile than before. I used to do things like that. Before I became the other woman, before I became the villain in everyone's favorite fairy tale, I used to be the kind of person who remembered details about people's lives. Charles reached for her hand, but she pulled away before he could make contact. The gesture was small, but it created a chasm between them that felt impossible to bridge. "I'm not the villain, Charles," Camilla continued, her voice growing stronger again. "I refuse to be painted as the wicked stepmother to Kate's perfect princess. But I also can't compete with someone who seems to have been born for this role when I've spent decades trying to prove I deserve it." The truth of her words settled over them both like dust. Charles looked out at Kate again, now standing and preparing to return to the palace, her notebook tucked safely in her bag. There was indeed something almost ethereal about the way she moved through her role, as if she had been destined for it from birth rather than having married into it by chance and love. As Kate disappeared from view, heading toward the palace's east entrance, Charles realized that the dynamic he had been observing from his window was more complex than he had initially understood. This wasn't simply about two women finding their places in the same family. This was about the future of the monarchy itself, and the question of who would define what that future looked like. The weekly family dinner had always been Charles's attempt to maintain some semblance of normalcy within the extraordinary circumstances of their lives. Tonight, however, the dining room felt more like a battlefield than a gathering place for loved ones. William sat across from Kate, their usual easy conversation replaced by the careful politeness of two people navigating uncharted waters. Charles observed his son as William pushed food around his plate, clearly lost in thought. The weight of being heir to the throne had always been heavy, but recently something else was troubling him. Perhaps it was the increasing tension between Camilla and Kate, or perhaps it was his own growing awareness that his father's reign would inevitably come to an end, thrusting him into a role he felt unprepared for despite a lifetime of preparation. Kate, for her part, seemed determined to maintain the facade of family harmony. She asked about everyone's day, complimented the chef on the excellent salmon, and shared amusing stories about George's latest school project. Yet Charles noticed the way her eyes kept darting to the empty chair where Camilla should have been sitting. "She's not feeling well," Charles had explained when Kate asked about Camilla's absence. But they all knew it wasn't illness that kept the queen consort away. It was the growing impossibility of sitting at the same table as Kate without saying something that couldn't be taken back. "Perhaps we should reschedule these dinners," William suggested carefully, setting down his fork. "It seems like everyone's schedules are becoming more complicated." Kate's face fell slightly before she recovered her composure. "Of course, if that would be easier for everyone." Charles felt a flash of irritation at his son's suggestion. These dinners were one of the few times they could all be together as a family, away from the protocols and public scrutiny that governed the rest of their lives. To abandon them would be to admit that they were failing at the most basic requirement of any family, the ability to share a meal together. "I think we should continue," Charles said firmly. "Families go through difficult periods. That doesn't mean we stop trying to be a family." William exchanged a look with Kate that Charles pretended not to notice. It was the kind of wordless communication that came from years of marriage and shared challenges. And it reminded Charles of the connection he had once shared with Diana. The thought brought with it a familiar pang of regret and loss. After dinner, Charles found himself walking the palace corridors alone, something he rarely did without security trailing at a discreet distance. Tonight, however, he had dismissed his protection detail, needing space to think without feeling observed and analyzed. He paused outside the blue drawing room, where he could hear the soft sound of piano music. Through the partially open door, he could see Kate sitting at the Steinway, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. She was playing one of Mozart's sonatas, the same piece Diana used to play during her more melancholy moments. Charles stood there listening, transported back to evenings 30 years ago, when Diana would retreat to this same piano after particularly difficult days. The music had been her escape, her way of processing emotions that she couldn't express in words. Now Kate was playing the same piece, and Charles wondered if she was seeking the same kind of solace. When the music stopped, Charles stepped into the room. Kate looked up, startled but not displeased to see him. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to rise from the piano bench. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "Please, don't apologize," Charles said, gesturing for her to remain seated. "Diana used to play that same piece. She said it helped her think." Kate's hand stilled on the keys. "I found her sheet music in the piano bench. I hope you don't mind that I borrowed it." "Of course not. Music should be played, not stored away like a museum piece." Charles moved closer, noting the small changes Kate had made to Diana's interpretation of the piece. Where Diana's playing had been technically perfect but emotionally turbulent, Kate's version was warmer, more grounded. "William tells me you've been having a difficult time lately," Kate said softly, her eyes focused on the piano keys rather than meeting his gaze. Charles was surprised by her directness. In their years of knowing each other, Kate had always maintained the proper boundaries between them, never presuming to discuss personal matters unless he brought them up first. "It's nothing that time won't resolve," he replied automatically, then caught himself. "Actually, that's not true. Some things seem to be getting more complicated rather than less so." Kate nodded as if she understood exactly what he meant. "William and I have been talking about taking the children away for a few weeks. Perhaps to Balmoral or maybe somewhere more private. Give everyone some space to breathe." The suggestion hit Charles like a physical blow. The idea of Kate and the children leaving, even temporarily, felt like losing the last stable element in an increasingly chaotic situation. "Is that what you want?" he asked, unable to keep the concern out of his voice. Kate finally looked up at him, and he was struck by the sadness in her eyes. "What I want is for this family to find a way to coexist peacefully. What I want is for the children to grow up feeling loved and secure by everyone in their lives. What I want is to stop feeling like my presence causes more problems than it solves." The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and Charles realized that Kate had been carrying the weight of the family's tensions far more heavily than anyone had recognized. "Kate," he began, then stopped, unsure of how to continue. How could he tell her that her presence wasn't the problem, but perhaps the solution? How could he explain that watching her navigate her role with such grace and integrity had shown him what the monarchy could become in the right hands? "I've been thinking about Diana a lot lately," Kate continued, her fingers absently picking out a simple melody. Not in a competitive way, but wondering if she felt this same sense of being caught between what people expected her to be and who she actually was. Charles sat down on the chair beside the piano, suddenly feeling every one of his 75 years.
"Diana felt many things, but I think her greatest struggle was feeling like she had to choose between being herself and being what the institution needed her to be. And did she ever find a way to be both?"
The question hung in the air between them. Charles thought about Diana's final years, when she had begun to find her own path separate from the constraints of royal protocol. She had been building something new, something that honored her role while allowing her authentic self to shine through. "She was beginning to," he said finally, "but she ran out of time." Kate's hand stilled on the keys again. "I don't want to run out of time, Charles. I don't want to spend years feeling like I'm walking on eggshells in my own family." The vulnerability in her voice moved something deep within Charles. Here was someone who had devoted herself completely to serving his family and his institution, asking for nothing more than the basic human need to feel accepted and valued. "You shouldn't have to," he said quietly, "and if I've failed to make that clear before now, then the fault is mine, not yours." Kate looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such a direct acknowledgement of the situation they all found themselves in. "What happens now?" she asked. Charles stood up, feeling the weight of decisions he had been avoiding for too long. "Now I remember that being king isn't just about wearing a crown and attending ceremonies. It's about protecting the people who matter most, even if that means making difficult choices." As he left the drawing room, Charles could hear Kate beginning to play again, but this time she had chosen something different, something hopeful and bright, like a promise of better days ahead. The royal calendar had always been a precisely orchestrated symphony of obligations, but lately it had become a strategic battlefield. Charles noticed how certain events now seemed designed to separate Kate and Camilla, ensuring they rarely appeared together in public. What had once been practical scheduling had transformed into an elaborate dance of avoidance. This morning's charity gala for children's mental health was supposed to be different. It was Kate's patronage, her passion project, and traditionally Camilla would have supported the event from the background. Instead, Camilla had suddenly developed a scheduling conflict that required her immediate attention elsewhere. Charles arrived at the venue early, something he rarely did, wanting to observe Kate in her element without the complications of family dynamics. The ballroom was already buzzing with activity as volunteers made final preparations. Kate moved through the space like a conductor leading an orchestra, somehow managing to be everywhere at once while making it look effortless. He watched as she knelt down to speak with a young boy, who had been brought to meet her, getting down to his eye level and listening with complete attention as he explained his drawing of a rainbow. The genuine joy on her face as she praised his artwork wasn't performed for cameras or onlookers. It was simply who she was. "Your Majesty," a voice behind him said. Charles turned to find Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of the children's hospital that would benefit from today's fundraising. "We weren't expecting you quite so early." "I wanted to see how everything was coming together," Charles replied, though the truth was more complicated. He had wanted to see Kate without the filter of family obligations clouding his judgment. Dr. Mitchell followed his gaze to where Kate was now helping volunteers arrange auction items. "She's remarkable, isn't she? I've worked with many members of the royal family over the years, and I've never seen anyone connect with the children the way she does. They seem to sense that she genuinely cares about them as individuals, not just as representatives of a cause." Charles nodded, remembering his conversation with Kate at the piano. The sadness in her voice when she had spoken about feeling like she caused more problems than she solved seemed impossible to reconcile with the confident, compassionate woman he was watching now. "Has she spoken to you about her concerns regarding her role?" Charles asked, then immediately regretted the question. It wasn't appropriate to fish for information about Kate's private thoughts from outsiders, no matter how well-intentioned. Dr. Mitchell looked surprised by the question. "Concerns? If anything, she seems more committed than ever. Just last week, she spent 3 hours visiting with families in our intensive care unit, and she's already scheduled to return next month for our new sibling support program launch." The contrast between Kate's public confidence and her private doubts troubled Charles more than he cared to admit. How many years had he spent assuming that people's public personas reflected their inner reality? How many times had he failed to see the struggles hiding behind composed facades? As the event officially began, Charles found himself watching Kate with new eyes. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, but now he could see the subtle signs of emotional exhaustion. The way she touched her earring when overwhelmed. The slight pause before her smile when faced with difficult questions. The almost imperceptible sag of her shoulders between conversations. When she delivered her speech about the importance of supporting children's mental health, her words carried a depth of understanding that came from personal experience. She spoke about the courage it takes to ask for help, about the strength found in vulnerability, and about the hope that exists even in the darkest moments. Charles realized that Kate wasn't just advocating for these children. She was speaking as someone who understood what it meant to struggle with invisible burdens. The recognition hit him like a revelation. All this time, while Camilla had been viewing Kate as a threat, Kate had been fighting her own battles with self-doubt and the pressure to be perfect. After the speech, during the networking portion of the event, Charles approached a group of donors who were enthusiastically discussing Kate's presentation. "She has such an authentic way of connecting with people," one woman was saying. "You can tell she's not just reading talking points. She really understands what these families are going through. My daughter struggles with anxiety," another donor added, "and when Princess Kate spoke with her earlier, she made her feel seen and heard in a way that even some therapists haven't managed. There's something special about how she listens." Charles found himself both proud and protective hearing these comments. Kate's gift for genuine human connection was being recognized and appreciated by everyone except the one person whose opinion she seemed to crave most. Camilla. As the evening wound down, Charles lingered, helping with the cleanup despite protests from staff that it wasn't necessary. He wanted to speak with Kate privately, but she was busy thanking volunteers and ensuring everyone felt appreciated for their contributions. Finally, as the last guest departed and the venue began to empty, Charles found Kate sitting alone at one of the auction tables, reviewing notes in her familiar small notebook. "Successful evening," he said, taking the seat beside her. Kate looked up with a tired but genuine smile. "It was wonderful. We raised more than we hoped, and I think we really connected with people about why this work matters." You connected with people, Charles corrected gently. Your speech was remarkable, Kate. The way you spoke about mental health challenges. It came from somewhere real. Kate's pen stilled in her hand. Everyone faces struggles, Charles. Being in a position of privilege doesn't make you immune to doubt or sadness or the feeling that you're not enough. The honesty in her admission made Charles's chest tight. Is that how you've been feeling? Not enough? Kate set down her pen and looked directly at him. I've been feeling like I'm walking through a minefield where every step might set off an explosion I didn't see coming. I love this family, and I love serving alongside William, but lately it feels like my very existence causes tension. With Camilla, Charles said, not making it a question. Kate nodded slowly. I've tried everything I can think of to make things better between us. I've stepped back from events she wanted to lead. I've made sure she gets equal recognition in press coverage. I've even suggested she take over some of my patronages if she felt more connected to them. Nothing seems to work. Charles felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. He had hoped that time would resolve the tension between his wife and daughter-in-law, but instead it seemed to be deepening into something that threatened the very foundation of their family unity. What would make things better? He asked. From your perspective, what would need to change? Kate was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. I think Camilla needs to feel secure in her own role before she can be comfortable with mine. And I think that security has to come from you, Charles. She needs to know that her position as your wife and as queen consort isn't threatened by my relationship with you or my work within the family. The insight struck Charles as both obvious and profound. Of course, Camilla's behavior stemmed from insecurity rather than malice. Of course, she was looking to him for reassurance rather than to Kate for competition. And what do you need? Charles asked. Kate's smile was sad but determined. I need to know that serving this family is worth the cost it's taking on my own sense of peace. I need to believe that the good we're doing outweighs the pain it's causing the people I love. As they sat together in the empty ballroom, surrounded by the remnants of an evening that had raised hundreds of thousands for children in need, Charles understood that he was facing a choice that would define not just his reign, but the future of his family. The question was no longer whether Kate belonged in their family. It was whether their family deserved someone as devoted and genuine as Kate. The morning after the charity gala, Charles made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of beginning his day with the usual briefings and correspondence, he walked directly to Camilla's private sitting room, where she typically spent her mornings reading newspapers and answering personal letters. He found her exactly where he expected, sitting by the tall windows with a cup of coffee and several newspapers spread across the small table beside her chair. She looked up when he entered, and he could see the wariness in her eyes. Their conversations had become increasingly difficult, filled with unspoken accusations and careful word choices designed to avoid topics that might explode into arguments. We need to talk, Charles said simply, taking the chair across from her. Camilla set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. If this is about last night's event, I had legitimate obligations that couldn't be rescheduled. This isn't about last night specifically, Charles replied. This is about every night, every event, every family gathering where you find reasons to be somewhere else when Kate is present. The directness of his statement seemed to catch Camilla off guard. She had grown accustomed to their conversations dancing around the real issues, never addressing the elephant in the room directly. I see, she said carefully. And I suppose Kate has been sharing her concerns about my behavior with you. Charles leaned forward, trying to bridge the physical and emotional distance between them. Kate has said nothing negative about you, Camilla, not once. If anything, she's blamed herself for the tension between you, wondering what she's done wrong and how she might fix it. Camilla's expression shifted from defensive to confused. That's impossible. She must know how I feel about her constant need to be the center of attention. Is that really what you think? Charles asked. That Kate seeks attention for its own sake? The question hung in the air while Camilla seemed to wrestle with her response. Charles could see the internal battle playing out across her features, the struggle between the narrative she had constructed about Kate and the evidence that contradicted it. I think Kate is very good at appearing humble while ensuring everyone notices her humility, Camilla said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Charles pulled out his phone and showed Camilla a series of photos from the previous evening. They weren't official event photos, but candid shots taken by security personnel for record-keeping purposes. In them, Kate was shown helping elderly guests to their seats, cleaning up spilled drinks without being asked, and sitting on the floor to speak with a child in a wheelchair. These photos were taken when Kate thought no one was watching, Charles said softly. There were no cameras, no reporters, no public relations benefit to any of these actions. Camilla studied the photos in silence, and Charles watched as something in her expression began to crack. The carefully constructed wall of resentment showed its first fissures. "Why are you showing me these?" she asked, her voice smaller than before. "Because I think you've been so focused on protecting yourself from what you thought Kate represented, that you've missed seeing who she actually is." Camilla stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to Charles. "And who is she, in your opinion?" Charles joined her at the window, looking out at the same garden where he had first begun to truly see Kate's character. "She's someone who reminds me of the best qualities your mother had, and the best qualities Diana had, and some unique qualities that are entirely her own. She's someone who makes this family better simply by being part of it." The comparison to Diana hung between them like a live wire. Charles rarely spoke about his first wife to Camilla, knowing how painful the subject remained for both of them. "Diana," Camilla repeated quietly. "You think Kate is like Diana?" "In some ways, yes. But Kate has something Diana struggled to find, a sense of peace with her role. Diana fought against the constraints of royal life because they felt like a prison to her. Kate has found a way to work within those same constraints while still remaining authentically herself." Camilla turned to face him, and Charles was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "Do you know what it's like to be compared to a saint every day of your life? Diana will always be perfect because she died young and beautiful and tragic. I have to live with being the woman who came after her, the woman who could never measure up to a memory." The pain in her voice was raw and honest, and Charles realized that Camilla's resentment of Kate was really a reflection of her unresolved feelings about Diana. "And now Kate comes along," Camilla continued, "and she's everything Diana was supposed to be, but actually better because she's not broken by it all. She makes it look easy, Charles. She makes it look like being a perfect royal wife and mother is as natural as breathing." Charles reached for Camilla's hands, and this time she didn't pull away. "Kate isn't perfect, Camilla. She has doubts and fears and moments of weakness just like anyone else. The difference is that she's learned to channel those struggles into empathy for others. Like at the charity event last night," Camilla said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. "Like every day," Charles confirmed. "Kate's strength comes from acknowledging her vulnerabilities, not from pretending they don't exist." They stood together in silence for several minutes, looking out at the garden where Kate often walked when she needed to think. Charles could see the internal battle Camilla was fighting, the effort it took to let go of the protective anger she had been carrying. "What do you need from me?" Charles asked finally. "What would make you feel secure enough in your own role to allow Kate to succeed in hers?" Camilla considered the question seriously. "I need to know that your admiration for Kate doesn't diminish your love for me. I need to know that when you look at her with such obvious pride, you're not wishing I could be more like her." The honesty of her admission broke Charles's heart. All this time, while he had been focused on the practical implications of the tension between his wife and daughter-in-law, he had missed the emotional core of the problem. "Camilla," he said gently, "my love for you has nothing to do with how you compare to anyone else. I love you for who you are, not for who I might want you to become." "But you do admire Kate," she said, not making it an accusation but seeking confirmation of what she already knew. "Yes, I do," Charles admitted. "Just as I admire William for his dedication, and Harry for his compassion, and you for your loyalty and strength. Admiring one person doesn't diminish my feelings for anyone else." Camilla nodded slowly, as if trying to convince herself that this could be true. "She really hasn't said anything negative about me. Kate speaks of you with respect and genuine affection. She's told me multiple times that she wishes she could find a way to make you more comfortable with her presence in the family. She wants my approval," Camilla said, and there was wonder in her voice as if this possibility had never occurred to her. "She wants your acceptance," Charles corrected. "She wants to be part of a family where everyone feels valued and secure." As the morning sun grew stronger, filling the room with warm light, Charles saw something shift in Camilla's posture. The rigid defensiveness that had defined her interactions with anything Kate-related seemed to soften slightly. What happens now? Camilla asked, echoing the same question Kate had posed to him just days earlier. Now we remember that we're all on the same side, Charles said. We're all working toward the same goal of serving this country and supporting this family. The question is whether we'll do it as allies or as reluctant coexistence. For the first time in months, when Camilla looked at Charles, he saw hope in her eyes instead of fear. The state dinner for the visiting French president was meant to be a demonstration of British diplomatic elegance, but for Charles, it had become something far more significant. It would be the first major family event since his conversation with Camilla, the first test of whether understanding could translate into changed behavior. Charles stood in his private dressing room, adjusting his formal decorations while his valet made final preparations. Through the connecting door, he could hear Camilla's lady-in-waiting discussing the evening's protocol. There was an energy in the air that felt different from recent formal occasions, less tense and more purposeful. When he emerged, Camilla was waiting in the sitting room, resplendent in a midnight blue gown that complemented the sapphire parure he had given her for their anniversary. She looked up from her final review of the guest list, and Charles was struck by how much more relaxed she appeared. "You look beautiful," he said, meaning it completely. "Thank you," she replied, and her smile was genuine rather than the careful, practiced expression she had worn to recent events. "Are you ready for this evening?" The question carried weight beyond its surface meaning. They both knew that tonight would set the tone for how their family functioned going forward. "I think so," Charles answered. "Are you?" Camilla straightened her shoulders in a gesture that reminded Charles of the determined woman he had fallen in love with decades ago. "I'm ready to try something different." They made their way to the grand staircase where William and Kate were already waiting. Kate wore a stunning emerald gown that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, paired with the diamond and emerald tiara that had become her signature piece for state occasions. She looked every inch the future queen, but more importantly, she looked confident and at peace. Charles watched as Camilla approached Kate, wondering if the old tension would resurface despite their morning conversation. Instead, Camilla paused and looked at Kate with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "That tiara suits you perfectly," Camilla said, and there was no hint of begrudging in her voice. "You wear it better than anyone since the Queen Mother." Kate's surprise was evident, but her response was warm and immediate. "Thank you, Camilla. That means a great deal coming from you." The exchange was brief, but Charles could see its impact on both women. Kate stood a little straighter, while Camilla seemed to shed some invisible burden she had been carrying. As they processed into the banquet hall, Charles found himself observing the evening with new eyes. The French president and his wife were charming guests, full of stories about their recent travels and eager to discuss the cultural connections between their countries. The conversation flowed easily among the royal family members, and for the first time in months, Charles felt like they were functioning as a team, rather than as individuals carefully avoiding conflict. During the dinner, Charles noticed small but significant changes in the dynamics. When Kate shared an anecdote about the children's recent visit to a French cultural exhibition, Camilla actually laughed and added her own related story. When Camilla mentioned her upcoming literacy initiative, Kate asked thoughtful questions and offered to connect her with relevant contacts. The French president's wife leaned toward Charles during a quiet moment between courses. "Your family has such wonderful chemistry," she observed. "You can see how much genuine affection there is between everyone." Charles glanced around the table, taking in William's animated discussion with the president about environmental policy, Kate's patient explanation to Camilla about some aspect of childhood education, and the general atmosphere of warmth and mutual respect. "We've been working on that," Charles replied honestly. After dinner, as they moved to the music room for the evening's entertainment, Charles found himself walking beside Kate while Camilla conversed with their guests ahead of them. "How are you feeling about tonight?" he asked quietly. Kate considered the question carefully. "Different, better. Like maybe we're finally all pulling in the same direction." "Camilla seems more relaxed," Charles observed. "She does," Kate agreed. "Whatever conversation you had with her, it helped. She's been looking at me tonight like she's actually seeing me rather than seeing a threat." Charles was struck by Kate's perceptiveness. She had immediately recognized the shift in Camilla's behavior and correctly identified its significance. "What changed?" Kate asked. Charles chose his words carefully. I think we all realized that we had been making assumptions about each other's motivations instead of actually talking about what we needed. Kate nodded thoughtfully. I spent so much time trying to figure out what I was doing wrong that I never considered that maybe it wasn't about my actions at all. It was never about what you were doing wrong, Charles assured her. It was about fear and insecurity, and the very human tendency to protect ourselves from perceived threats, even when those threats aren't real. The entertainment that evening was a string quartet performing pieces by French and British composers, creating a musical bridge between the two cultures. Charles watched as Camilla and Kate sat near each other, sharing quiet comments about the music and occasionally smiling at the same musical phrases. During a particularly beautiful passage from Debussy, Charles caught Kate's eye and saw tears there. When he raised an eyebrow in silent question, she mouthed, "Happy tears," and gestured subtly toward Camilla, who was clearly enjoying both the music and Kate's company. As the evening wound down and they said their farewells to the French delegation, Charles felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with diplomatic success. The evening had been flawless from a protocol standpoint, but more importantly, it had been genuinely enjoyable for everyone involved. Later, as they gathered in the family drawing room for a traditional post-event debrief, the atmosphere was completely different from recent gatherings. Instead of careful politeness and avoided topics, there was actual conversation and shared laughter. The president's wife was delightful, Camilla said, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea. Her stories about renovating the Élysée Palace were fascinating. She was impressed with your knowledge of historical textiles, Kate added. I could see her making mental notes about everything you told her. Camilla looked pleased by the compliment. I've been studying that period for my book project. It's wonderful when you get to share something you're passionate about with someone who truly appreciates it. William joined the conversation. From where he had been reviewing notes from his discussion with the president, the evening felt different tonight, more cohesive, like we were actually functioning as a family unit instead of as individuals who happened to work together. Charles felt a warmth spread through his chest at his son's observation. William had put into words exactly what Charles had been feeling throughout the evening. I think we've all learned something about the importance of communication, Charles said carefully, about not making assumptions about what other people are thinking or feeling. Kate and Camilla exchanged a look that seemed to carry its own conversation. There was understanding there and something that looked like the beginning of genuine friendship. What I learned, Camilla said slowly, is that sometimes the person you think is your competition is actually someone who could be your greatest ally, if you're brave enough to let them. The honesty in her statement created a moment of perfect silence in the room. Kate's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling. What I learned, Kate responded, is that family isn't just about blood or marriage. It's about choosing to show up for each other, especially when it's difficult. As Charles looked around the room at his family, genuinely relaxed and content in each other's company for the first time in months, he realized that this was what he had been fighting for all along, not just the preservation of the monarchy, but the creation of something worth preserving. 3 months after the French state dinner, the transformation in the family dynamics had become undeniable. Charles found himself watching from his study window again, but this time the scene below was dramatically different. Kate and Camilla were walking together through the memorial garden, their heads bent in earnest conversation as they examined the progress of the autumn plantings. What struck Charles most was not just that they were together, but how natural their interaction appeared. There was no stiffness, no careful politeness, just two women who seemed genuinely comfortable in each other's company. Camilla gestured animatedly at something Kate had said, and Kate threw back her head in laughter at Camilla's response. The sight filled Charles with a satisfaction that went beyond relief. This wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was the presence of genuine connection. The family he had always hoped they could become was finally emerging from the shadows of old wounds and misunderstandings. A knock at his door interrupted his observations. William entered carrying a folder of documents, but wearing an expression that suggested his visit was about more than routine business. "Father," William began, taking the chair across from Charles's desk, "I wanted to talk to you about the upcoming tour of Australia and New Zealand." Charles nodded, familiar with the trip that had been in planning stages for months. "What about it?" Kate and I have been discussing the possibility of Camilla joining us for certain portions of the tour, William said carefully. Specifically, the events focused on literacy and women's issues, where her expertise would be valuable. The suggestion caught Charles off guard. Joint tours with multiple family members were logistically complex and required careful coordination of roles and responsibilities. More significantly, William's suggestion indicated a level of trust and collaboration between Kate and Camilla that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. That's an interesting proposal, Charles said slowly. How does Kate feel about it? William's smile was genuine and warm. It was actually Kate's idea. She said that Camilla's work with literacy programs would complement their planned school visits perfectly, and that having her there would strengthen the overall impact of the tour. Charles felt a familiar surge of admiration for Kate's ability to see beyond personal dynamics, to focus on what would serve the greater good. But he was also impressed by the growth in trust that such a suggestion represented. And Camilla? How does she feel about the proposal? Enthusiastic, from what Kate tells me. Apparently, they've already begun coordinating their wardrobes to ensure a cohesive visual presentation. The detail about wardrobe coordination made Charles smile. The careful attention to such details indicated that both women were taking the collaboration seriously and wanted it to succeed. There's something else, William continued, his expression becoming more serious. Kate and I have been talking about the future, about what our reign will look like when the time comes. We want Camilla to know that she'll always have a place in our court, that her experience and wisdom will be valued and utilized. The generosity of the statement moved Charles deeply. William and Kate were not just making peace with Camilla. They were actively planning to include her in their vision of the monarchy's future. That's remarkably thoughtful, Charles said. Have you shared this with her directly? Not yet. We wanted to discuss it with you first, to make sure we weren't overstepping any boundaries or making commitments we weren't authorized to make. Charles considered the implications of what William was proposing. It represented a fundamental shift in how royal transitions typically occurred, where previous generations often found themselves sidelined when new monarchs ascended to the throne. I think Camilla would be honored and grateful to hear such an assurance, Charles said finally. And I think it shows remarkable maturity and wisdom on your part to think in terms of continuity, rather than replacement. William nodded, looking relieved. Kate feels strongly that Camilla's decades of service and hard-won expertise shouldn't be wasted just because of a change in leadership. She says that every organization benefits from institutional memory and experienced voices. Once again, Charles found himself marveling at Kate's ability to think strategically while remaining grounded in human values. She understood that honoring Camilla's contributions wasn't just the right thing to do. It was the smart thing to do. After William left, Charles decided to seek out Camilla and Kate in the garden. He found them exactly where he had observed them from his window, now sitting on a bench and sharing what appeared to be a thermos of tea. May I join you? He asked, approaching their secluded spot among the roses. Of course, Kate said, making room on the bench. We were just discussing the Memorial Foundation's plans for next year. Charles settled between them, noting how comfortable the three of them seemed together. It was a dynamic he had always hoped for but never quite believed would be possible. William tells me you're planning to coordinate some appearances during the Australia tour, Charles said to Camilla. Camilla's face lit up with genuine excitement. Kate had the brilliant idea of connecting my literacy work with their education-focused events. We think we can create something really impactful together. The literacy rates among Indigenous children are particularly concerning, Kate added. Camilla's experience with reading programs could provide insights that would make our visits more than just ceremonial. Charles listened as they outlined their collaborative plans, struck by how seamlessly they had learned to work together. Their different strengths and perspectives seemed to complement rather than compete with each other. There's something else we wanted to discuss with you, Camilla said, exchanging a look with Kate that suggested they had rehearsed this conversation. We've been talking about the annual Christmas broadcast, Kate continued, and we think it might be meaningful to include some footage of the three of us working together, to show the continuity and collaboration within the family. The suggestion was both practical and symbolic. The Christmas broadcast was one of the monarchy's most important annual communications, watched by millions around the world. Including images of family harmony and cooperation would send a powerful message about the institution's stability and unity. "What did you have in mind?" Charles asked. "Perhaps some scenes from our joint charity work or from the planning sessions for the Australia tour," Camilla suggested. "Nothing too staged, just authentic moments that show how we function as a team." Charles thought about the irony of the situation. A year ago, the idea of showcasing Camilla and Kate working together would have been impossible. Now their collaboration had become one of the monarchy's greatest strengths. "I think that's an excellent idea," he said. "The public has been watching our family navigate challenges, and showing them how we've grown stronger together would be both honest and inspiring." As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the garden in golden light, Charles found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The path hadn't been easy, requiring difficult conversations, painful honesty, and the willingness to let go of old grievances and assumptions. But sitting here with Kate and Camilla, watching them plan future collaborations with enthusiasm and mutual respect, Charles felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had not just survived the challenges that had threatened to tear their family apart. They had used those challenges as opportunities to build something stronger and more authentic. "You know," Camilla said thoughtfully, "I spent so much time worrying about whether I belonged in this family that I forgot to appreciate what a privilege it is to serve alongside people I genuinely admire." Kate reached over and squeezed Camilla's hand. "The privilege is mutual. I've learned so much from watching how you handle the more difficult aspects of public life with such grace and humor." Charles felt his chest tighten with emotion as he watched these two remarkable women acknowledge each other's worth. The transformation was complete, but more importantly, it felt permanent. They had moved beyond tolerance to genuine affection and respect. As they walked back toward the palace together, Charles realized that his family had finally become what he had always hoped it could be. A group of individuals united not just by duty or obligation, but by choice and love. 1 year later, Charles stood at the same window where this story had begun, but everything had changed. The garden below bloomed with new life, and more importantly, so did his family. The Australia and New Zealand tour had been a tremendous success, with international media praising the seamless collaboration between Kate and Camilla. Their joint appearances had redefined what royal partnerships could look like, showing the world a monarchy that valued cooperation over hierarchy. Today marked a special milestone, the first anniversary of what the palace staff had quietly begun, calling the reconciliation dinner, that French state dinner where the healing had truly begun. To commemorate the occasion, the family had planned an intimate celebration, just the four of them, in the same room where they had shared so many difficult conversations. Charles turned from the window to find Camilla arranging flowers in a crystal vase, humming softly to herself. The sight filled him with contentment. The woman he had married was still there, but she seemed lighter somehow, freed from the burden of constantly defending her position within the family. "You seem happy," he observed. Camilla looked up with a smile that reached her eyes. "I am happy, genuinely, surprisingly happy. I wake up each morning looking forward to the day instead of bracing myself for whatever conflict might arise." "And Kate?" "Kate has become one of my closest friends," Camilla said simply. "I know that probably sounds impossible given where we were a year ago, but it's true. She's taught me so much about approaching challenges with grace instead of defensiveness." Charles moved closer, studying the flowers Camilla had chosen. They were a mix of varieties from the memorial garden and the newer plantings that Kate had suggested, symbolically blending the old with the new. "What has Kate learned from you?" he asked. Camilla considered the question thoughtfully. "I think I've shown her that it's possible to maintain your sense of humor and your authentic self even in the most formal circumstances. She was always worried about making mistakes or offending someone. I've helped her understand that being human makes you more relatable, not less worthy of respect." The growth in both women was evident not just in their relationship with each other, but in how they each approached their individual roles. Kate had become more confident and spontaneous in her public appearances, while Camilla had found new ways to channel her natural warmth into her official duties. William and Kate arrived early, as had become their custom for family gatherings. They appeared relaxed and happy, their relationship strengthened by having weathered the family crisis together. Charles noticed how William's posture had changed over the past year. He carried himself with more confidence, secure in the knowledge that his family was unified behind him. "How are the children?" Camilla asked, embracing Kate warmly. "Excited about half-term break," Kate replied. "George has been asking when he can visit Highgrove again to see the organic garden. Charlotte wants to know if you'll teach her more about pressing flowers. And Louis just wants to play hide-and-seek in the maze." The easy way Kate spoke about the children spending time with Camilla represented perhaps the most significant change of all. The next generation was growing up seeing their grandmother and step-grandmother as allies rather than competitors, creating a foundation of family unity that would serve the monarchy well in years to come. As they gathered for dinner, Charles reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The challenges they had faced had been real and painful, but they had also been necessary. Without the crisis, they might have continued to coexist politely, but never truly connected. The struggle had forced them to confront their assumptions, communicate honestly, and ultimately choose love over fear. "I have something I'd like to share," Kate said during dessert, reaching for a small wrapped package she had placed beside her chair. "Charles, this is for you as a thank you for everything you've done to help our family heal." Charles unwrapped the gift to find a leather-bound photo album. As he opened it, he realized it contained candid photographs documenting the past year of their journey together. There were images from the charity gala, the state dinner, the Australia tour, and dozens of private family moments that showed the evolution of their relationships. The final page contained a handwritten note from Kate. "To Charles, who taught us that leadership isn't about avoiding difficult conversations, but about having the courage to pursue healing even when the path isn't clear. Thank you for fighting for our family. With love and gratitude, Kate." Charles felt tears prick his eyes as he turned the pages, seeing their story told through images that captured both the challenges and the triumphs. In one photo from early in the year, he could see the tension in Camilla's posture and the sadness in Kate's eyes. In contrast, the recent images showed two women who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, their body language open and relaxed. "This is beautiful," Charles said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "Look at the inscription," Camilla added softly. Charles flipped to the front of the album, where Kate had written, "For the man who sees the best in everyone and never gives up on the people he loves. Thank you for believing that our family could be healed when we couldn't believe it ourselves." The words captured something essential about Charles's character that he hadn't fully recognized in himself. Throughout the crisis, he had maintained faith in his family's ability to overcome their differences, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. "I want to say something," William interjected, raising his wine glass. "A year ago, our family was struggling with divisions that felt insurmountable. Today, we're stronger than we've ever been. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because we have a father and king who refused to accept that love wasn't strong enough to overcome fear." They raised their glasses in a toast, but Charles felt the weight of gratitude rather than accomplishment. The real heroes of this story were the women who had found the courage to be vulnerable with each other, to admit their fears and insecurities, and to choose growth over self-protection. "What I've learned this year," Charles said, "is that true leadership in a family isn't about maintaining peace at any cost. It's about creating space for honest communication, even when that communication is initially painful. It's about believing in people's capacity for growth and giving them room to surprise you." Kate reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You gave us permission to be imperfect while we figured out how to be better. And you never made us feel like we were disappointing you during the process," Camilla added. That made all the difference. As the evening wound down, they moved to the same drawing room where Kate had played piano that night when everything began to change. This time Camilla sat down at the bench and began playing a piece Charles didn't recognize. "It's something I've been working on," she explained, "a composition inspired by our journey this year. I call it Coming Home." The melody was beautiful and complex, starting with what sounded like separate themes that gradually wove together into a harmonious whole. As Charles listened, he realized it was the perfect metaphor for what their family had accomplished. When the music ended, they sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Kate spoke. "I have one more surprise," she said with a mischievous smile. "I've been secretly documenting some of our conversations over the past year, with everyone's permission, of course. I thought maybe someday, when we're much older, we might want to remember exactly how we found our way back to each other. She pulled out a small recording device and played a snippet from one of their early conversations, when the tension was still thick and every word was carefully chosen. Then she played a clip from just a few weeks ago, when Kate and Camilla were laughing together about a mishap during a charity event. The contrast was stark and moving. The voices in the early recording sounded guarded and formal, while the recent conversation was filled with warmth and genuine affection. "That's remarkable," William said softly. "You can actually hear the difference in how we talk to each other." "What strikes me most," Charles observed, "is how much more ourselves we all sound in the recent recordings. It's as if we finally stopped performing our roles and started simply being who we are." As they prepared to part ways for the evening, Charles felt a deep sense of completeness. The family he had always dreamed of having was no longer just a hope. It was a reality. They had faced their greatest challenge and emerged not just intact, but strengthened. Standing once again at his window later that night, Charles looked out at the garden where so much of this transformation had taken place. The memorial roses bloomed alongside the new plantings, creating a perfect metaphor for honoring the past while embracing the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as every day did for a family in their position, but Charles faced the future with confidence, knowing that whatever difficulties lay ahead, they would meet them together with honesty, love, and the unshakable faith that their bond was strong enough to weather any storm. The story that had begun with misunderstanding and hurt had become a testament to the healing power of love, patience, and the courage to choose connection over self-protection. Charles looked toward Kate one final time, not with the worried concern that had marked the beginning of